Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Timeless Lessons, a weekly message dedicated in memory of my dear grandfather, Abe Russ. May his memory be blessed. This week's Torah portion, Vayeitzei, speaks about Jacob, how he leaves his family's home and starts to build his own home, going down into his other family's town, meeting ultimately Leah and Rachel and starting to build the tribes of Israel. And the story of how he meets Rachel is an incredible one. A little bit of a confusing one, if you will. So he shows up into this town where Rachel lives, and he goes right to the well, which probably makes a lot of sense because that's probably on a long journey back in those days what he needed in order to drink. And he shows up at the well, and he sees that there are a bunch of shepherds around the well. And he asks the shepherds, do you guys know Rachel from this family? And they go, yeah, we do. And as Rachel's about to come closer, she was walking in with the animals at this point, he notices that the well has a big rock on it. Probably back in those days, every drinking source was covered with some rock because they were probably protecting it against animals or insects or any level of poison. And the Torah says, before they tell the story of how he meets Rachel, which is the most important part of the story, right? That's the actual narrative that we care about. It digresses and says, this rock was so heavy that it required all the shepherds to get together and lift it together. And Jacob saw Rachel and saw the rock, and on his own went and lifted it, lifting the rock off the well. And there's a rabbi named Rav Malkiel Keller who asked a great question. He said, really? That's the stories we're telling you? The digression point of the Torah from Jacob, the spiritual giant, is how strong he was, what he was showing off now? This is what we're talking about? Now, on the verse is a commentator named Rashi. Rashi goes even further. Rashi goes, he lifted the rock the way you would pop a cork out of a bottle. As if. This is what we're valuing now, physical prowess. We're telling stories of rabbis walking down the streets lifting cars over their heads. Who cares about the rock? He meets Rachel. That's it. That's the important part of the story. And then he goes into the house, and then he marries them, and then all of a sudden the story continues. Why stop at this point for? And the answer that he gives, I think, is one of the most fundamental concepts in life. He says that there's two ways to see the world, to see your life. The first way is through physical eyes. If you see your life through a physical lens, you see your life following the following equation. Ability leads to responsibility. You have, so if you're a good person, you give. You've made money, so you give charity. You've wisdom, you teach. You have a talent, you volunteer. Right? If you have something, you have the ability, then you go take on responsibility. That's how most of humanity lives. And if you don't have the ability, it doesn't make sense to take on responsibility. In fact, that is not the way a spiritually minded person sees the world. The way a spiritually minded person sees the world is responsibility leads to ability. Each of us have a soul that is greater and stronger than anything in the physical world. Each of us have potential and capabilities that far surpasses the physical universe. If you ever worked out or ran a marathon, just a little bit you see this. How you can find things in you that you never knew existed, how you can go places and run and do push-ups. If you ever had a kid, you've seen this. No one's prepared for raising a child until you have a child. You take on projects, responsibilities. If you ever have an illness in your family, all these things in life, you see these little clues along the way that I didn't know that I was this strong or this wise or this sensitive or this spiritual. The way the spiritual world works is that if you believe that the soul, the spirit, is the core of the universe, then you have capacity that you may never, ever fully tap into. So how do you tap into your latent potential? How do you do it? So the way you really do it is responsibility leads to ability. By taking on greater responsibility than you have now, you now have no choice but to access ability that you never thought you'd have to tap into, but that you tap into. By lifting stronger weights, your body has to grow stronger. By taking on responsibilities of childhood, of family, or spirituality, or of community, by taking on bigger roles and bigger jobs, you tap into some source that was always there that you never ever went to because you never needed to. That's how you live life that's great. You push yourself beyond what you think you're capable of, and then you find that you're capable of something more than you thought. Your responsibility is what leads, and then your ability is what you find. Jacob couldn't lift that rock. He wasn't the strong one. Esau, his brother, was the strong one. Jacob was the one that was sitting in the tents and studying. But the rock needed to be lifted. And he understood that if God wanted that rock to be lifted, if it was meant to be for the rock to be lifted, then he would get the ability that he never had before to lift that rock. And when he went to do it, he understood the principle of responsibility leads to ability, so much so that Rashi tells us it was nothing for him. God gave him so much power, or he had already his divine power inside that he tapped into, that allowed something that seemed to be impossible, not only possible, but probable. The idea of constantly recreating yourself, constantly pushing yourself, is a core theme of the entire Torah. And it's a theme of our lives. How much of our lives have we not done because we're waiting to get the ability before we take on responsibility, and we'll never get it because that's not how it works? How much of our lives is ready right now for us to grow if we would just step into the abyss, step into the darkness, step into the pain, step into the challenge, into the tension, and take on more than what we thought possible, only to find out that we've had it all in there before? That's living spiritually. That's the lesson of Jacob. And that's the lesson, the timeless lesson that's inside each and every one of us.